Tariq Ramadan is here. He is Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at St. Antony's College at Oxford University. He's considered to be one of Europe's most prominent scholars on Islam. The Washington Post called him a Muslim Martin Luther. Born in Switzerland to Egyptian parents, he's a grandson of the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna. In 2004, he was banned from traveling to the United States under provision of the Patriot Act. That ban was lifted early this year. He has written more than 20 books about Islam and its integration. His new book is called The Quest for Meaning. It is about a philosophy of pluralism. At a time when questions about Islam in America are being hotly debated, I am pleased to have Tariq Ramadan with me here in London. Welcome.
Thank you.
This idea of the burning at a church of the Quran has what implications? Because David Petraeus has spoken out forcefully against it.
I think he's right. When you know the Islamic world and what is going in the Islamic majority countries today, and this perception that anything which is coming from the West, and especially from the States, could be perceived as a provocation. And in fact, it is a provocation, and the Terry Jones, who is promoting this from his church in Florida, is just trying to target Islam and Muslims, and he did it before with a book. So I would say that the American Muslims and the Western Muslims are not going to react to this. I think that they saw in the recent past that they know, what freedom of expression means, and they know also the meaning of a provocation. But this could be instrumentalized in Muslim majority countries by groups and even, population saying, look, this is now, it's too much. You did it with the
You see somebody in
cartoon.
America burning the Quran, you don't know who's doing it, you just know it's happening.
Exactly, which is exactly what could be done, and it could be instrumentalized by trends and Muslims and saying, look, this is again, and even by governments, because with the cartoon issues, we had governments directing the attention of the people towards the West. When they are not, promoting democracy and democratization within, it's very easy to push this emotional trend towards or against the West. And the impact of this could be just a catastrophe.
What about building this, some people think it's a mosque, cultural center near the site of 9/11?
I think, first, as a question of right, this should be allowed because this is the right of any citizen, and it's a community center, which is not the Ground Zero Mosque, as it was said. It's just a community center near the place. Now, I also think that the Muslims, when they deal with such issues, they have to take into account the sensitivity of the society. So it might be a bad, good idea. Now, it's a question of right, and it's a question of living together in the future, not only in a peaceful way, but to live together and to promote a better understanding. I know that the people who are behind the community center, and I know the people who are trying to promote its presence there, and I think it's good. They will do a good job. But they also have to take into account this. So I think, it's always a balance between your rights and the collective sensitivity, the collective psychology, and not to let any party, any political trend, any populist or any fundamentalist Christian groups using this to nurture this fear within the society. So,
how do you do that?
So this is where you have to communicate. This is where you have to be part of the society. I think that the American Muslims should now be quite clear that they are not involved in the American life only when it comes to Islamic issues. They are citizens. They should be involved in everything which has to do with the future of this society, and to build bridges with people at the grassroots level. I was calling in the book what I believe. I say the future is national movements of local initiatives where you work together. And look at what happened in New York. You had Jewish representatives, Christian representatives coming and saying, it should be respected. We have to work together. So with this leadership, we can do something. And this is why we have to change the understanding of the people, to know more about Islam. I'm invited to so many lectures and conferences. 95% of what I have to say is always to explain what Islam is not. It's not violence, not this, it's not that, but to speak about my spirituality, the meaning of my life, the values, how much we have in common with Christianity and Judaism. This is what we have to talk about, and not only about the problems.
Okay, tell me what Islam is and what Islam is not.
Okay, what Islam is, first is a religion, which means that there is fundamental principles to believe in one God, and the oneness of God is quite important. Now, it's religion and a spirituality. Spirituality means that it gives to your life a meaning. To God you belong, and to God you will go back. So between belonging to Him and going back to Him, what you have to do is to try to get peace. Islam is all about salam. Salam is the Arabic word for peace. And everything I'm doing, struggling with my own self, my own ego, to get that inner peace is a jihad. So the jihad is exactly the opposite of what we are saying. It's not the way towards war, it's the way towards peace. To master, to control your inner tensions between the bad and the good, temptation that you have within yourself, an attraction towards the good, to get that peace. So this is Islam. So if I talk about Islam in such a way, you can find so many similarities with Christianity and Judaism. What Islam is not is a way to impose itself onto the other. There is no constraint or you cannot compulsion in matter of religion. La ikraha fi din, as we say in Arabic, coming from the Quran. You cannot impose this. So you have to respect the freedom, you have to respect the diversity of religions, and there is something which is quite important. There is an applied ethics, applied Islamic ethics, which has to do with respecting, for example, the life of the innocents. So ethics of war in Islam is completely opposed to what we had in the States, in New York, or what we have in London, in the streets by killing innocent people. Not only this is not Islamic, it's anti-Islamic, it's against my faith. So the first victims are the people who are killed. The second victims are the Muslims themselves. So I would say that this is what Islam is and has nothing to do with this violence.
What responsibility, and I ask this carefully, does Islam have for allowing the perception to be?
Yes, I think it's a good question, and this is something which is the starting point of our accountability as Muslims. We may say Islam is not this and it's not that. At the end of the day, the Muslims should speak out. They should speak out about their faith, not to be
and in condemnation of any acts that are taken in the name of the religion,
exactly.
When the religion, by its own definition, would be against that violent act.
Exactly. I think that this is their obligation and their duty. This is a moral duty. Speak out and say this is not Islamic, this is against Islam. And what Islam is a great religion, but Muslims are not acting in a great way. Very often they are doing things that are in contradiction with their religion. And they have to speak out. The only thing that I have, and this is a concern, you know, I was born in the West. I'm dealing with Western media, I'm dealing with Western intellectuals. There is something which is quite problematic in the whole issue, is that we are condemning, but it's as if sometimes we are not heard. The only voices that are heard are the radical, violent, extremist voices. But when we come, the great majority of the Muslim scholars around the world, intellectuals, come and say, we condemn. It's not us. We are not for that. What we want is, you know, proactivity and to deal. It's as if we are not talking. It's as if there is a vicious circle just to listen to the voices that are confirming a perception. Why we need now, it's from the media, it's from the journalists, it's from the intellectuals, it's from the scholars to come together and to be able to say, okay, look, Islam is not that. It's not only the good and the bad. You know, it's not, we don't, you know, this binary vision that we had under colonization, the good are with us and the bad are against us. Right. Islam is as complex as Christianity.
It's not black and white, it's everything.
Not black and, you know, if I was to define Christianity with what is done or is going to be done or claimed to be done in Florida, burning the Quran, I would say this is Christianity, so it's black and white. That's not the way to deal with Christianity, because this Christianity is the diversity of interpretations. It's the same with Islam.
When you talk about integration, what do you mean?
I'm even talking now about something which is
beyond integration.
Exactly,
right.
Post-integration
right.
process. Integration for me at the beginning, this was a very progressive term and concept 30 years ago, when, you know, first generation settling down and try to be a good citizen and to keep your values and your principles. So now, if you look at something which is important, a good way of being integrated is three things, what I call the 3 L's. The first one is to abide by the law. The second is to speak the language of the country. And the third is loyalty to the country. When you get the 3 L's, you are part of the society. You look at the American Muslims, you look at the European Muslims, they get, and they have now these 3 L's, and they speak the language, they speak English, French, European languages, and they are loyal to the country, meaning by this that loyalty is not blind loyalty. You and me, as active citizens, we shouldn't be passive citizen. If we think that the government is doing right, we say yes. If we think that the government is doing wrong, we should be critical. It's not that I'm critical towards my country and my government sometimes that I'm less loyal. The positive loyalty is always a critical loyalty. So I think that this is it. Now, if you look at millions of European and Western Muslims, they are integrated. This is over. It's post-integration. And the post-integration is one word: contribution. Give to your society, be involved in your society, give to the people. Meaning what? Meaning not only to give, you know, as a citizen, it's also a philosophical and religious debate about your values, about your ethics, and then about the meaning of life, and then about consumerism, about, you know, global warming. This is why I'm saying that the Muslims should be involved in all the social, political, and cultural discussions of their time.
You have argued, and you've said, and you just repeated, that Islam is American, Islam is European, Islam is...
Yes, Islam is a Western religion, and it's an Asian religion, is an African religion, and the universality is Islam is the same set of principles accepting the diversity of cultures. So when someone is coming to me and say, you know what, we are waiting for you to be integrated, I say, I'm sorry, I'm already integrated. Your mind is not yet integrating me, but I am. I abide by the law, I'm involved in the society. So beyond this now, it's really time for us to come to the discussion, and this is why I wrote this book, The Quest for Meaning, to let the people come together and say, beyond our diversity, there is we have to develop a philosophy of pluralism, understanding that we may have different viewpoints, but at the end of the day, we are just looking or trying to solve the same essential problems in our life.
Why is the act of violence appeal to young people?
For many reasons. For many reasons. The first thing that we have to say, if you come back to the Quran and you read the Quran, you cannot say there is nothing about violence. Some contextualized texts are dealing with violence and wars. And by the way, all the religious scriptures and the sacred scriptures are talking about violence. So if you come with a very literalist reading of these passages without contextualizing them, you can be attracted by saying, you know, Islam is all about promoting, you know, the truth by attacking an offensive jihad or qital, which is the war, the Arabic word for war. So you can take these interpretations, and then you also have a sense within the Muslim majority societies, a sense of frustration. No freedom, no democracy, poverty, no jobs, and sometimes with more sophisticated minds, the perception that, yes, the political colonization is over. The cultural colonization and still the economic colonization is still there. So it's something which is a binary vision. And the dogmatic minds, it's a question of minds, it's not a question of ignorance. It's sometimes you can be very sophisticated, very educated, but you have a dogmatic mind. And the dogmatic mind is a binary mind, is us versus them, black and white. Right. And then I'm right, so you're wrong. And I can impose onto you the fact that I'm right by any means possible. So this is attractive for some segments, a very tiny minority. We have to add this, tiny minorities of people throughout the world, and educated and less educated people. And this is why, as Muslims, as a Muslim scholar, I should be involved in this discussion to show how much this interpretation is wrong, it's anti-Islamic, and this is not the way to deal with your society. You want to change your society, be involved in democratic processes, if they are, and if they are not, by spreading around an awareness that you have to free your society in a peaceful way.
When you wanted to go to Notre Dame to accept this position, what did they say to you when they denied the visa?
First, I was in Niger, and everything was sorted out. My, furniture was in the States. I had, registered my kids in schools there. And then I got a call from the American embassy in Switzerland telling me your visa has been revoked. No explanation for 2 months. And then they said, oh, Patriot Act, then you are connected. And then they changed this by saying, no, you are connected with some groups. And then I got a second, I applied
These were charity groups that they thought were supporting.
This came later because I went to the American embassy to apply again, and then they sent someone from the Homeland Security. I told him myself, look, I gave money to all these organizations, from Terre des Hommes in Switzerland, which is a secular organization, to some organizations supporting education in Palestine.
And they made the argument that some of that money had gone to...
Exactly. But the problem is that they didn't check the dates, because I gave the money 1 year before they blacklisted the organization. So it was silly. Telling me you should reasonably have known that this organization was, and my answer is, so I should reasonably have known before you that you are going to blacklist this organization. Silly and quite ridiculous.
What's interesting, and I'm really fascinated by this, is how you are perceived, in a sense. People listen to what you say and they say, there is the most reasonable man I've ever heard speak about. There should be more people from every religion speaking about his faith the way you do. And then they say, and I'm baffled by this, then they say, well, but we don't really, we think that's all a front. He really believes he has these very radical fundamentalist views. Why is that, do you think?
You use the word, which is the essence of the question, is trust. If you look at Islam, I am perceived as a controversial Muslim intellectual, and I'm talking about this in the book Radical, What I Believe, saying, look, Islam per se is a controversial topic. If you speak about Islam, it's going to be controversial because this is a controversial topic of the day. So I'm perceived as an intellectual Muslim, and something which is very surprising is that I speak your language with your words. I have been born here. Philosophy, Western philosophy, concepts, translating from Arabic, say, what's that? Something should be wrong. So what I'm saying is that I'm not listened to. So some people are saying, oh, you may have a double talk. And my answer is, but you may have a double hearing. Is that there is a problem.
Does it anything have to do with the fact that on your mother's side, your maternal grandfather was one of the founders of the Muslim Brotherhood?
20 years ago, yes. But now, I'm almost 50. Till when I'm going to be the grandson of Hassan al-Banna. That's fine. I said about him that I'm contextualizing his life and what he did with few things with some things I agree, some things I disagree. I'm contextualizing what he did in his time, but I want to be judged on what I said and what I have been doing for the last 25 years. And if you listen to the people say, we don't trust him, say, okay, come with evidences, come with proofs, what is wrong in what he's saying. I say, I don't know, I feel it. But this feeling is coming from a very deep mistrust between the people. It's just a Western Muslim voice speaking our language is very difficult to trust, and still this is the future.
What did Samuel Huntington have right and wrong, if anything?
I think first that there are things that are right, and by the way, it's not, we reduced very often what he said about a clash of civilization. I think it's much more sophisticated than that. What he said is really that the perception of the world will be, traditions and religious traditions and cultures being separated or distinguished or opposed. And this is, you cannot just say it's not happening. If you travel in the Muslim majority countries and you listen to the people, the West, them, what they want, they are talking about them.
Right.
You are in the West, I'm living in the West. I hear every day, day in, day out, I hear people saying, you Muslim, you the other. Even when I'm a Swiss citizen and with a European background, I'm always perceived as the other. So the us versus them and the clash.
So when you hear you perceive the other simply because you're Muslim.
Exactly. By the only fact that I'm a Muslim, I represent.
And when you're in a Muslim country, anybody that's Western,
so it's the West, is they, exactly. So we cannot. I don't call it a clash of civilizations. I call it a clash of perceptions.
Some argue about Islam today. Recently, Tony Blair on this program. I want you to take a look at it.
The problem is not simply the extremism. And I think one of the mistakes is in thinking that if you deal with the extremists, you deal with the problem. And my view is that the problem is actually a narrative, and in particular a narrative about Islam, that is a narrative shared by a far broader spectrum than we think. And that narrative is basically that Islam is under oppression from the West, that the West is hostile, and that by the leadership of Muslim countries being in alliance with the West, they are somehow complicit in a betrayal of the fundamentals of their religion. And I think that that is a narrative that has a broader reach than we think, and I think it's a narrative that has to be challenged inside and outside Islam.
And how do you challenge it?
You challenge it primarily by actually empowering and supporting those within Islam who will stand up and say, and there are many of them, that is nonsense. Actually, Islam will sort out its own problems. In any event, it is, you know, it is a religion. It does not describe the politics of every nation. There are many different nations with many different problems. We can solve our own problems. And actually, the world that we want today is a world of peaceful coexistence where Islam embraces the 21st century.
But how far are you away in what you think today from Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations?
I don't think there is a clash of civilizations, but I think his the issue he raised is essentially the correct issue. I don't think the 21st century will be a century of political ideology. I think it will be a century of religious or cultural ideology with the potential to divide. And in that division cause conflict.
So what do you think of this narrative idea expressed by Mr. Blair?
I think that he is right on one dimension of the whole problem. I don't think that we are only talking about terrorism. We are talking about the narrative. What he's saying, when he is saying, you know,
there's a narrative out there that says that within the Islamic world and beyond, yes, that the West is opposed to Islam.
This is a perception. We cannot deny the fact that the great majority, by the way, it's not only a minority, the great majority of the Muslims in Muslim majority countries and even in the West, they have the perception that there is something in the West which is against Islam. And so the narrative is there. And if you look at what happened, you know, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, also all these wars, and then also what is going on in Palestine, and then what is going on in the West. We were talking about what is happening in the States with, you know, this controversies around the community center burning the Quran, and then also in Europe, when you are building a mosque is problematic. In my own country, Switzerland, banning the minarets and then the headscarf. The perception is that there is a pressure on the Muslims, and the narrative is there. We should, and this is where I agree with him that there is this narrative. Now, how are we going to solve this? There is two things that I want to say. The first one, and I agree with him on that, and with many other Muslims, Muslims come back to the fundamentals and be critical. This critical engagement of Muslims, self-criticism, critical mind, this is something what I've been talking about it for the last 25 years. We need Muslims with deep faith and critical minds to be able to look at our own failures from within and to build, and not to be the victims, not to play the victim mentality, not to be the object of their history, but to be the subject of our own history.
Which you hope that Catholics will do, and Jews will do, and Buddhists will do, and everyone else. Right.
It's to be a human being, by the way. It's just to be a subject. But this is where I disagree with Tony Blair, is just to not acknowledge the fact that in his own policy, in the way he is dealing with the Muslim majority countries, there are problems. The West is not, you know, completely white in anything which has to do with the Muslim majority countries. We are in the West supporting dictatorships. We are in the West dealing with some Muslim scholars, very traditionalist, when they are protecting our geostrategic interests. Right. We are happy. So I think that he also have to be not, you know, it's not nonsense. You cannot say it's nonsense. It's not a black and white picture, but there are things to be said. When, for example, George Bush said, these people who are doing what they are doing are against our values and our democracies, and this is the only reason he's giving. I think that they are wrong. We condemn what they are doing as Muslims, but it's not only this that they are blaming. They are blaming the United States of America and the European countries sometimes to be in contradiction with their own values. So it's not nonsense, and I think that I would like, as a European, I would like as a Western citizens, to be able to talk with my own governments to say, if you want to change this perception, you have to be more consistent with your own values. You cannot promote democracy within and just deal with dictatorships outside and tell
because you think it serves your geostrategic interest.
Exactly.
And when in fact the people who are there may very well perceive it as you are against us.
Exactly.
You know,
which is exactly it. It's
because you were supporting, in our judgment, people who were oppressing us.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
yes.
What is the necessity of modernization and Islam?
It's a very important topic. You know, I have been working on that field for the last 20 years, working on how do we go for, you know, there is an Islamic Arabic concept called ijtihad. How do you reform? You have a critical reasoning interpretation on the text. You are not just reading the text literally, you are contextualizing them. And I reached a limit where I was, and this is why I wrote a book called Radical Reform, Islamic Ethics and Liberation. We need a liberation. Islam doesn't need reform, but the Muslim minds need to be reformed, our interpretations. So I would say that from within, the Muslims, the way they read the text, the way they contextualize the text, the way they deal with surrounding cultures, not to confuse being Muslim with being an Arab, not to Arabize Islam, not to culturalize our religion. We have principles, but the universality of these principles is that we can take for all the cultures and just be consistent with our values. And we have to work on many fields. And in the book, I'm talking about, you know, social issues, women, very important, sciences. In the past, we are so great with sciences, and it's as if now we have nothing to contribute with. I think it's just not acceptable from a very old tradition, very old civilization, not to be involved in anything which has to do with scientific discoveries and technologies. So we have to
because it puts a lock on your own potential.
Exactly. And I think that this is where, as Muslims, we have to work, and this is what I call this reform. You know, there are two ways to speak about reform. Adaptation reform, when you just adapt yourself to the current situation of the world, or transformational reform, to try to change this world for the better. And I think that every one of us, atheist, agnostic, Jew, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, if we are consistent with our values, we only know one thing that we have in common. We have to change this world for the better.
The quest for meaning, Tariq Ramadan, developing a philosophy of pluralism, and this also what I believe, from the author of Western Muslims and the Future of Islam at St. Antony College at Oxford. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.